I didn't even want to go. The email came in at 9:47 a.m. sharp. Subject line, Dinner with the Donnellys, Friday 7 p.m. A formal invite from HR with a little smiley face emoji added like that made it personal. After 22 years of building CoreLogic Dynamics from a tiny tech startup in a rented warehouse to a $120 million analytics firm with global clients, I was being summoned, not to a board meeting, not to an investor call, but to dinner with the CEO and his family. My name is Mia, and I was the first person ever hired at CoreLogic. I wasn't just part of the company. I was the company. When I started, we had 3 clients and 1 printer that jammed if you looked at it wrong. I built our client systems, managed vendor contracts, handled finances until we could afford a CFO, and pitched deals that kept the lights on. The founder, Doug Donnelly, used to call me the quiet engine. He said I kept things moving when everything else threatened to fall apart. But lately, I'd felt the shift. Doug had become more distant. My updates were skimmed rather than read. Our regular Monday meetings turned into bi-weekly calls that were sometimes rescheduled indefinitely. And then came the interns. Young, loud, buzzwords flying out of their mouths like confetti. I could feel the cold breeze coming before the window opened. So when I got the dinner invite, I knew. I just didn't know how cold that breeze was going to be. The restaurant was one of those swanky downtown rooftops with overpriced scallops and dramatic lighting. I wore a soft navy blouse and the pearl earrings my daughter gave me last Mother's Day. I looked respectable, executive, the way I always had. Doug was already there, standing beside a long white linen table with his wife, Patrice, and their daughter, Harper. She looked like she'd just walked off a runway. Blonde, polished, not a wrinkle in sight. In her linen pantsuit, she looked like the walking embodiment of LinkedIn CEO aesthetic. Mia, Doug beamed, arms open. So glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, I said, smiling as I slid into my seat across from him. My stomach coiled like rope. Dinner started off like any other executive gathering. Too much wine, too many compliments that meant too little. Harper asked about the company's early days, her tone light but condescending. It's so funny imagining you guys working out of like a garage or something, she said with a little giggle. I smiled. It wasn't funny at the time. Doug cleared his throat. Actually, Mia saved the company twice in the first 5 years. She brought in that defense contract that got us our first $1 million. Harper smirked. Well, every company needs its building blocks. I should have walked out then, but I stayed because I wanted to see how far they'd go. Halfway through the main course, halibut over saffron rice, Doug folded his hands on the table like a man making a peace offering. Mia, we've been doing some long-term planning, he said slowly. You've been more than instrumental in getting CoreLogic where it is. Here it comes. But as we position the company for its next phase, we feel it's time to bring in a new generation. Fresh energy, new vision. I kept my expression neutral. Harper just finished her executive leadership program at Stanford. He added proudly, like I hadn't mentored 5 Ivy Leaguers already. She's got some amazing ideas about modernizing the brand, moving us into blockchain, AI. Impressive, I said calmly. What's the transition plan? He looked relieved. 6 weeks. She'll shadow you initially. We'll handle the formal announcement after the quarterly call. Of course, there's a generous package. We want you to feel appreciated. That's when Harper leaned forward, fork in hand, eyes glinting. Time to step aside, Granny, she said with a little smirk. Let us take it from here. The table went silent. Even Patrice's fork paused midair. I looked at her for a long moment, then I smiled. Completely understand. Because what they didn't know, what they never even thought to check, was that CoreLogic wasn't just a company I helped build. It was a company I owned. In a way they had forgotten. Doug had once given me 5% in equity when we couldn't afford a raise. I never sold it. and I'd been watching quietly ever since. They thought I'd forgotten. Doug gave me 5% of the company in 2003, 2 years after we'd started CoreLogic. We were nearly bankrupt. I had just pulled an all-nighter cleaning up a billing disaster that nearly lost us our biggest client. Doug walked into my office, red-eyed and anxious, and handed me a single-page agreement. "Mia," he'd said, "I can't pay you what you're worth right now, but if we make it through this, I want you to have a piece of it." At the time, I barely glanced at it. It felt like a thank you card more than a contract. I was exhausted, loyal, and stupidly hopeful. But years later, when we incorporated and brought in our first outside investor, I had a lawyer review everything I'd signed. That's when I found out. It wasn't symbolic. It was real equity. Voting rights. Ownership. I never brought it up. Never boasted. Never reminded Doug. I didn't need to. I was part of the fabric of the company, or so I believed. But over time, CoreLogic changed, and so did Doug. He stopped asking for input and started chasing buzzwords. Consultants came and went, but the ones who smiled at Harper's LinkedIn profile stayed longer. Suddenly, value wasn't measured in loyalty or results. It was measured in optics, and I didn't look the part anymore. The next Monday, I walked into work like nothing had happened, smiled at reception, took my usual black coffee from the machine that still hissed like a steam train, logged into my email. My access was untouched. For now, no official announcements, just silence. Luis, our data engineer, stopped by my office with that cautious look he gets when something's off. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Just a little dinner with the Donnellys." He winced. I heard. Word's starting to get around. People are confused. I met his eyes. "Let them wonder." I wasn't ready to show my hand. Not yet. Instead, I called up the shareholder portal and logged in. My 5% was still there, untouched. And with the new investors bringing fresh capital, that sliver of ownership had grown into something substantial. I downloaded everything: stock agreements, board voting history, executive pay packages. Then I requested a meeting with Doug's executive assistant. "I'd like 30 minutes with Doug. Private." She blinked, surprised, but nodded. "I'll see what I can do." When I stepped into Doug's office on Wednesday, he looked up with a wary smile. "Mia," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "How are things?" "Curious," I said, sitting down. "You didn't mention the equity I still hold." His smile froze, just slightly. "I assumed you'd cashed out by now." I didn't. I placed the printed shareholder agreement on his desk. "And unless I missed something, I still have voting rights." Doug folded his hands. "Mia, this doesn't need to get complicated. We're offering you a generous exit." "I'm not leaving yet," I said calmly. "I'll support the transition. I'll do it with grace. But if Harper plans to restructure the company, if she intends to bring in her own team or sell off assets, I want my say." He frowned. "You're holding on to something out of sentimentality." "No," I said. "I'm holding on to what I built." I left before he could respond. Let him stew in it. That evening, I pulled out a dusty file cabinet in my home office. Inside was everything from the early days: sketches of the original architecture, notes from client pitches, the very first UI mock-ups drawn on paper napkins. And then I found something I hadn't seen in years. An NDA signed by Doug in 2005, acknowledging that several proprietary tools I'd built for the company had originated from my previous consulting work. The kind of detail most people forget about. But I don't forget. The next day, I met with Melissa, an old friend and now a top-tier IP attorney. We had coffee at a quiet bistro 2 blocks from CoreLogic HQ. I laid it all out. "Can I protect this?" I asked. She smiled as she flipped through the pages. "Mia, you own this, at least part of it. And with your equity, you've got leverage they didn't expect." I exhaled, the weight of 2 decades sitting heavy in my chest. "They think I'm a stepping stone." "Then let's show them," she said. that stones can crack foundations. By the end of the week, the whispers had started. Why is Mia still here? Why is she so calm? Why hasn't Harper taken over yet? I smiled as I passed them in the hall. They'd invited me to dinner to write my ending, but they didn't realize I was writing the next chapter. By Monday, Harper had moved into my office. Not officially, of course, but she was hovering, showing up early, walking in with coffee, and a forced smile like we were best friends. Her tone was sugar-coated, her questions loaded. She asked about vendor relationships and back-end systems, but I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't here to learn. She was here to replace. Do you always approve budget requests manually? She asked, flipping through a report she barely understood. Always, I replied. It catches errors. Automation doesn't. But if we use predictive tools are only as good as the data behind them. We still have legacy clients using decade-old systems. Garbage in, garbage out. She blinked, clearly unfamiliar with the concept, then smiled again. You're a bit old school, huh? There it was. I just smiled back. Old school kept this company from collapsing during 3 separate downturns, but feel free to learn the hard way. She didn't like that. By Wednesday, she had organized her first strategy meeting without me. Sent invites to the leadership team, excluding only one name. Mine. Luis forwarded me the invite anyway. Thought you'd want to see this. The subject line? Vision 2.0, CoreLogic's future begins now. Cute. I clicked open the agenda and immediately saw what she was up to. New branding initiative, hiring freeze in operations, potential outsourcing of back-end services. I laughed out loud. Outsourcing back-end? Half our client value was back-end support. Clients didn't come to us for shiny dashboards. They came because we knew how to keep their systems running when everyone else bailed. She didn't know the company. She knew of the company. The version her father talked about over Sunday brunch. That same afternoon, Doug dropped by my desk, something he hadn't done in years. Mia, he said, putting on that politician voice. I want to make sure the transition is smooth. Harper's getting a lot of visibility already. Visibility isn't knowledge, I said flatly. He paused. You've always been the soul of this place. You invited me to dinner to gut the soul out of it. Doug flinched, just slightly. That's not what this is. Then what is it, Doug? Because I built the systems. I kept the investors calm. I held your company together while you were taking sabbaticals in Napa. Silence. I know about the Series C dilution, I added. You're prepping the company for acquisition. His eyes widened. How? I've been here long enough to know how the winds change. He didn't deny it, just looked at the floor. We had to make hard choices. The board wanted a fresh face, a new story. A story you thought didn't include me. He hesitated. We're offering you a package. I'm not interested in your package, I said. I'm interested in what I'm owed. I walked away before he could respond. Back in my office, I emailed Melissa. I wanted the provisional patents filed by the end of the week. Not just the old architecture, but the improvements I'd developed over the years. I wasn't sabotaging the company, but I was drawing a line. Anything that bore my fingerprints was going to be legally protected. Thursday morning, I found Harper at the whiteboard, mapping out her new client retention model. It was lifted, almost word for word, from a strategy document I'd written 6 years ago. She must have dug through the archives. When she saw me watching, she smiled. I'm just modernizing, she said. Your work was a great foundation. No problem, I said, stepping closer. Just make sure you cite your sources. Plagiarism doesn't look great on quarterly reports. Her smile flickered. By Friday, the IT team was whispering. Vanessa, my operations lead, cornered me in the break room. They're nervous, she said quietly. Harper's pushing changes that don't make sense, and Doug's not saying a word. Because he's not in charge anymore, I said. He just doesn't know it yet. Vanessa looked at me. What are you doing, Mia? Setting the table, I replied. For what? For the storm, I said. But it's okay. I plan to smile through it. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of red wine and my laptop open. The emails were already drafted. One to the remaining 3 board members, reminding them of my equity, and the original shareholder clause that required unanimous consent for structural overhauls. One to Technova Systems, a company we'd nearly acquired last year, now growing fast. I was on good terms with their CEO. I wanted a meeting. And one last email to myself. Subject line, leverage. I was storing everything, just in case. I didn't want war. I wanted recognition. But if they kept pushing me, they'd find out just how old school I could be. The official announcement came on a Tuesday morning. All-staff meeting, mandatory attendance. Harper at the front of the auditorium with a wireless mic, pacing like a TED speaker, while a slideshow played behind her filled with stock photos and vague slogans. Vision, velocity, victory. Doug introduced her with a warm smile, calling her a breath of fresh air. Harper beamed and thanked him like she'd just won a beauty pageant. Then she turned to the staff and said it. It's time for a new chapter, she began. A younger, leaner, and more innovative CoreLogic. And there it was. Not even subtle. I sat in the second row, arms folded, watching the faces around me. Most people tried to hide their discomfort. Vanessa looked stunned. Luis wouldn't even meet my eyes. Then Harper gestured toward the projector, and a slide came up with the words, Organizational Streamlining Plan. Phase 1. That's when my jaw tightened, because that slide detailed a restructuring plan, cuts to back-end operations, outsourced IT functions, merging departments, and worst of all, legacy management transition. Meaning me. They didn't even say my name. After the meeting, Harper approached me in the hallway. Alone. Confident. I hope you'll be graceful about this, she said, voice low. It's what people expect of veterans. I tilted my head. You mean women who've outlived 3 CEOs and built the systems keeping this place standing? She didn't answer, just smiled like I was being difficult. That afternoon, HR sent an official separation package, a check with a lot of zeros, an NDA, and a clause that stated I was to assist in a full knowledge transfer. And that's when they pushed too far. I walked into Doug's office, package in hand. He was already bracing for it. Mia, he started. You let your daughter stand up there and pretend this was her idea, I said. You let her call me obsolete in front of everyone, and now you want me to hand over my work like a loyal old dog? It's not like that. It's exactly like that, I said. And let me be clear, I'm not signing anything. Not today. Not ever. He exhaled. Then you're forcing us to terminate. You're forgetting something, I said, reaching into my bag. I still have my shareholder seat. You try to force me out without board approval, you'll be in breach of the original agreement. Doug went pale. You think Harper's ideas are shiny and new, but they're dangerous. Cutting the back end will cripple your infrastructure. And that predictive automation model she keeps talking about? It doesn't even comply with our client contracts. You know that. He leaned back, silent. I'm not trying to sink the ship, I added, but I won't let you sink me with it. That night, I met Vanessa and Luis at a quiet diner across town. I slid them both manila envelopes. What is this? Vanessa asked. Proof, I said, that what we built isn't just lines of code. It's intellectual property. Documented, time-stamped, traceable. You're going to sue them? Luis asked. Not unless they make me, I said. But I want you both to be protected. Harper's already planning a second round of cuts. Vanessa nodded slowly. She's got the PR team working on the press release. They're cleaning house before the acquisition, I said. CoreLogic is being packaged, streamlined, turned into a shiny object. Luis looked up. Are you going to stop it? No, I said. I'm going to shape it. Over the next 3 days, I worked like a ghost. Quiet, unassuming, but precise. I met with Melissa again, filed a cease and desist letter regarding the reuse of proprietary modules in Harper's new systems. I sent a letter to the board, formal notice that I intended to vote against the restructuring unless a neutral third-party audit was completed, and I met with the CEO of Technova over lunch. Just a chat. But when I mentioned CoreLogic's shifting leadership, his eyebrows rose. "They're positioning for a sale," I said. He nodded slowly. "That would explain the talent reaching out to us." I smiled. "If you're interested, I can tell you which systems you'd want to protect, and who actually understands them." By Friday, the pressure had reached Harper. Her voice had a new edge to it in meetings. Her smiles were tighter. The confidence was cracking. Because the people she thought she could lead were starting to look back at me. And all I did was smile. Because the storm she tried to unleash? I'd already built the levees. By Monday, 3 of Harper's flashy new initiatives had failed. The vendor migration she promised would cut costs, delayed due to integration issues, also known as Luis, quietly pulling the plug on a compatibility patch he'd personally written 2 years ago. The rebranding proposal? On hold after the legal team flagged it for infringing on a smaller tech firm's trademark. A firm I knew personally. I might have tipped them off. And the new predictive analytics model? It crashed the second it was tested on live client data. Garbage in, garbage out, just like I'd warned. But Harper didn't stop. She doubled down. She called a meeting that afternoon, mandatory for all department heads. Her voice was clipped, fake smiling through her frustration. "We are going through growing pains," she said. "But I want to assure you, we are on the right path. Disruption is never comfortable." From the corner of the room, I raised an eyebrow. "Disruption works when there's a parachute. You've cut every safety net this company had." She smiled tightly. "Thank you for your feedback, Mia." Doug sat in silence. He wasn't even trying to hide anymore. Just a figurehead slumped in a chair, letting his daughter steer the ship toward an iceberg. After the meeting, Vanessa caught up with me. "3 of our longtime clients called today," she said, voice low. "They're nervous. One's threatening to walk if their service quality drops again." I nodded. "Let me guess. Harper hasn't returned their emails." She thinks they'll wait. They won't. I went home that night, opened my laptop, and wrote a 2-line email. To Daniel Rayner. Subject: follow up from our lunch. If your board is serious, now is the time to move. Daniel Rayner was the CEO of Technova, and his board had been circling CoreLogic for months, waiting for the perfect moment to make a move. I wasn't going to sabotage anything, but I was going to hand them a mirror. Let them see what was happening behind the curtain. The next morning, I found Harper in my old office, feet up on the desk, tossing a stress ball between her hands. She didn't even look up when I knocked. "Can I help you?" she asked, like I was the intern. "I need a few minutes." She sighed. "Make it quick." I stepped inside, calm as ever. "You're losing the company." That got her attention. "I know you think people will follow you because you talk about innovation and branding, but this place wasn't built on slogans. It was built on trust, relationships, systems that actually work." She stood up, eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "No," I said. "I'm giving you a chance." "To what?" "To stop pretending you know what you're doing." She scoffed. "My father is being pushed to the sidelines by his own board," I said. "You're a figurehead, just like he is now." She stared at me, the bravado cracking just a little. "You want to lead?" I added. "Fine, lead, but don't burn the foundation down just to prove you can light a match." She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. Later that day, Doug requested a private meeting. No assistants, no Harper. He looked tired. Really tired. "Mia," he said, sitting down across from me. "What do you want?" I took a breath. "I want recognition, not a payout, not a title. Recognition. He rubbed his face. The board is spooked. They've seen the instability. They know your name is still tied to every critical system. They should be spooked, I said. They handed a multi-million-dollar operation to someone who thinks legacy experience is a liability. And Technova? He asked quietly. I just smiled. I had lunch with Daniel. The offer's real, but I haven't decided yet. Doug looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months. You could walk away from all of this. I could, I said, but I won't. Because what I built matters, and if they want to keep using it, they're going to do it on my terms. That evening, I got a text from Vanessa. Client X just sent an official letter of concern to the board. Things are shifting. I replied with 2 words. Hold steady. Harper had the microphone, but I had the stage. And in just a few more moves, I'd be the one rewriting the script. The boardroom was full, not just physically, but viscerally. The kind of full where tension hangs in the air like static and everyone pretends they're calm when they can barely breathe. It was Thursday. Emergency session. The board had called it. The CEO, the interim leadership team, department heads, and me. Doug sat at the end of the table, looking 10 years older than he had 2 weeks ago. Harper sat beside him, flipping nervously through a leather notebook she hadn't written a single useful word in. And across from me, the man I'd spoken with over lunch just days ago. Daniel Rayner, CEO of Technova, now wearing the polite, detached expression of someone evaluating a company's organs before deciding whether to transplant or walk away. Before we begin, said Celeste, the board chairwoman, we need to address the elephant in the room. She nodded toward me. Mia has brought to our attention several items, contractual, technical, and operational, that were not disclosed during our internal assessments of CoreLogic's transition phase. A few heads turned. Doug's face was stone. Harper glanced at me like she finally understood she'd stepped into something much bigger than her. Celeste continued. As per our original shareholder agreement, any attempt to restructure the executive function requires unanimous board approval if it affects stakeholders with more than a 3% share. She turned toward me. Mia, would you like to speak? I stood, not rushed, not emotional, just grounded. I'm not here to cause chaos, I began. I've never wanted that. I'm here because for over 2 decades, I gave everything I had to this company. And somewhere along the way, people started treating that as a weakness, as expendable. Harper's jaw clenched. I didn't look at her. I don't want a crown. I don't need a title. But I do want my work respected. I want my contributions acknowledged. And I want whoever leads this company to understand that innovation means nothing without a foundation to stand on. There was silence. Then Daniel cleared his throat. We've been watching this closely, he said, gesturing around the room. And we've seen the fallout. 3 major clients have voiced concern. 2 have paused contract renewals. And based on internal reports, the systems that make CoreLogic valuable are not as autonomous as previously claimed. His gaze shifted toward Harper. She froze. He looked back at the board. Our offer still stands, but it's contingent on leadership stability. And frankly, we won't proceed if the current transition plan remains in place. Translation: Harper had to go. Doug opened his mouth, but Celeste held up a hand. Let's take a 10-minute recess. People rose, whispering among themselves as they filtered into the hallway. I stayed seated. So did Harper. She looked at me. Really looked at me. I didn't mean to destroy anything, she said, her voice small now. I met her eyes. You wanted to prove yourself, I get it. But you came in swinging without ever asking what we were swinging at. You treated people like obstacles. And you treated me like a footnote. She swallowed. What happens now? I leaned in slightly. That's not up to me anymore. That's the board's call. 10 minutes later, we returned. Celeste stood and delivered the verdict like a calm judge. Effective immediately, Harper Donnelly is relieved of all transition leadership duties. Doug will remain in an advisory role through the acquisition period. Mia Carter, she turned to me, will lead a transitional advisory team, reporting directly to the board and our prospective partners at Technova. I didn't smile. I just nodded. Later that week, I signed my consulting contract. 3 times my old salary, full autonomy, and authority over systems integration during the acquisition. Harper left quietly. No goodbye email, no farewell party. Doug shook my hand one last time in the lobby. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I know," I replied. 2 months later, CoreLogic officially became part of Technova. Most of the staff stayed. I handpicked a new leadership team. Vanessa became director of operations. Luis took over engineering. Half the company now reported to people I'd personally trained. And I didn't move back into my old office. I worked from a small home setup overlooking the lake. Twice a week, I walked barefoot on the deck with my coffee, watching the sunrise while client dashboards loaded smoothly in the background. Systems I'd designed, still humming quietly beneath the surface. One evening, I got an email from Celeste. Subject: Legacy Mia. What you did, the way you handled it. We've never seen anything like it. You didn't just protect your legacy. You reminded everyone what real leadership looks like. I sat there a long time, staring at the screen. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about power. It was about value. Knowing it, owning it, and refusing to let anyone take it from you.